that's what you are.
Hello, my name is Louise Bavro, president of Memoirs by Louise, a company that specializes in recording family histories and preserving memories for future generations. The following presentation is an interview with Elaine and Melvin Lynn, who have graciously allowed me into their hearts and home. Please join us on a journey that begins with stories of their ancestors and continues right up until the present.
Give me your complete name.
My name is Elaine Lynn
What was your maiden name?
Eiglosh.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn in 1933.
And who were you named after?
I was named after my grandmother's mother, Bubby Hoodie, they called her. And my name is Yehudis.
Is your family name different than the original name? Was any name changed at all?
I was always Eiglosh, and I became a Lynn.
Who were the first family members that arrived in this country? Do you know?
My grandmother and grandfather from my mother's side, and my grandmother and grandfather from my father's side with my grandfather. He came over as a baby.
Do you know where each side came from approximately, if you know the name of the town, if not the country?
Yes, my father's family came from Warsaw, Poland, and my mother's family came from Romania.
Do you have any idea of what their life was like when they first came to America? Do you have any stories that might have been passed down about how life was?
Yes,
Start with one side and then go to the other.
My mother's side.
Okay.
My grandfather was a house painter, had a tremendous sense of humor, and was very intelligent, spoke many languages, 4 or 5 languages, and he had a rather large family, and they lived in Brooklyn, and he worked hard, and I think it was a happy family. My father's family came from Poland at the turn of the century, and unfortunately my father's father passed away at an early age when my father was still in high school, and that caused some difficulty in the family. My father, in an effort to support himself and not to have the guilt of his mother supporting him, quit school unbeknownst to his mother and got a job at a farm doing farm work. When my grandmother found out that he had quit school, she insisted that he come back to work. There's another side to that story. I don't know which story is true. Either my grandmother forced him to come back, or allegedly the farmer came after him with a pitchfork. So I don't know.
So he went back to school.
So then he went back to school. She worked very hard. She was widowed at that point, and she worked very hard to support him. She sold shoelaces, she cleaned offices, and she also dealt in second mortgages. And a combination of all 3 got him through high school and college. And in addition, he worked at a pocketbook company to earn some money so that he could work his way through school. And life was difficult for them, but education was a great value, and he did become a pharmacist. He graduated from...
Let me go on. We're talking about your grandparents basically now, so let's give their names and you know, give them an identity. Talk about, you're talking about them a little bit now, but let's name them. And if you can, approximate maybe when they were born, if you can.
Oh, grandparents, I don't think I can approximate their birth. It would, I would have to...
Let's give their names.
Okay, on my mother's side, it was Morris, or Maish, we used to call him. He preferred to be called Maish because he said that Zeta or Grandpa was a title for an old person, and he felt very youthful. And since he didn't have a beard and he wasn't all white-haired, he wanted to be called Maish, and that's how we called him. And he was married to Rachel, or Ruchel. Ruchel was sickly, and she died at the age of 52.
Did you know her maiden name?
Yes, Schatz.
And now on the other side?
On the other side, my father, his mother's name was Esther Malka. My daughter is named after her. And she was...
Her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Rosenfeld. And she was married to Eliezer, or Lewis. And Lewis was a tailor. And he died when my father was in high school, and I never met him. So
Can you, I know you described them a little bit already. What would you like to say about Moshe?
I think that his sense of humor was his outstanding quality. He was devoted to my mother. He came often. He visited us often. And he had his apartment in Kew Gardens for a while. And before that, he came from Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn. And we saw him on a fairly regular basis. He visited for the day.
Wasn't he a bit of a prankster?
It wouldn't be putting it...
Wasn't there a story you told me about how he left his second wife on the train?
Yes,
and
right.
he got off, and she had to find her way to your
Right.
mother's house?
Right.
That was funny.
Yeah. They were coming to visit, and he got up and got off the train. That's right. And when my mother saw him coming alone, she said, "Where's Becky?" It was his third wife, actually.
Oh, it's their one.
Right. And he says, I got up, she wasn't aware, and I got off the train. I thought she would follow me, but she didn't. She came in, she was furious. Why didn't you tell me? So I didn't do that deliberately, but he could do things like that. Yes, he did play
And
tricks.
his wife, Rachel, did you have any, you didn't have too many memories of her?
No, she died before I was born.
Okay, now the other side. Esther Malka, what would you like
Esther Malka lived with us when my father was an only child, as I said, and the arrangement was that when he married my mother, she would live in the house, and they had agreed that she would live as long as she needed to in our home, and that was the arrangement, and that's how it was. My mother worked in the store with my father. My father had a drugstore. And so my grandmother actually raised us, and I felt very close to my grandmother, Bubby. And I remember my biggest fears at night were that someday she might die, because I knew that she was getting old and I loved her very much. And she lived to a ripe old age, and she passed away. She was well into her 80s.
So you were very close with her?
Very close. She was arthritic, and she had many needs, and she needed to have her hair fixed for her, which all the grandchildren used to do. She needed her back scratched. She couldn't reach. Her knees were always a source of great pain for her. And so we always took care of her needs whenever we could, as she took care of ours.
And how about her? Do you remember much about her husband? He died.
He died.
You said.
Yes, he died also in probably in his 40s. I was figuring that out. He died when my father was in high school, so I would say that he was no more than 45.
Any stories that you might remember?
Just that he was a tailor, and no stories really that I can...
Okay. Where are the grandparents buried? Do you have any idea?
Yes. My mother's parents are buried in Mount Hebron, and my father's parents are at the Montefiore Cemetery in Springfield Gardens.
And Mount Hebron is also in Queens?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'd like to move on to your parents. First of all, tell me their names.
My father's name was David Eiglash.
When was he born? About?
About 1900.
And your mother's name?
My mother was Jenny Amster was her maiden name, Eiglosh. And she was 7 years younger than my father, so she was born in 1907, July 13th.
And where were they born?
My father was born in Warsaw and came to this country at an early age. I don't think he was more than 1 or 2. And my mother was born in Brooklyn.
I'd like you to describe your parents now, both physically and their personalities. Whatever comes to your mind. And physically, if you were picturing them, what do you see?
I see a very loving couple. They kissed and hugged at any given time. So I remember the affection that they had for each other. They laughed, they giggled together. My mother had a weight problem. She was obese. And my father did not share that problem, lucky. But he did put on some weight later in his life. My mother was a smoker, and that led somewhat to her early death. She was 49 when she died of heart complications.
How would you describe their personalities? Start with your mother.
My mother was very sociable. She had many friends. She was competent in the drugstore. She helped my father, and she was very good in the store. She used to host many card game and parties in the house. We always had friends visiting, and
So she was a good hostess.
excellent hostess, and always loved to have family and friends around her all the time.
And you mentioned to me before that she was very good in a crisis.
Yes, and that might have been some of her training that she got in the drugstore, but I know if there was something, a great emergency that had to be dealt with, she was very good. She never backed away from an emergency. And I do remember at her funeral, she had so many people there, and people of all colors and religions, and it just they all flocked to pay their respects to her when she died. Customers that used to come into the store that loved her. Everybody loved her. She was very, very well loved.
And how about your father?
My father was a competent pharmacist, also very loyal, dedicated to his family. I hold him personally responsible for my education and my interests. I spent a lot of time with my father in the drugstore, and I learned a lot about science from him. When I wanted to take a commercial course in high school and become a secretary and go and buy clothes the way my sisters were going to, my father insisted that I take an academic course and go to college. And I did. And it was in 1965, when my father was on his deathbed, I leaned over to him and I thanked him for insisting that I go to college, because I was going to start my job on February 1st, 1965, as a teacher, which I've held for all these years. And he died shortly before I was to start, but it really was because of his insistence that I did become a teacher.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask you to share some anecdotes, and in speaking with you before, you mentioned a story about a cookie jar that I think would be fun to relate.
Yes. Since I mentioned to you that my mother was a friend to all, there was a family, Dr. and Mrs. Wagner and their 2 sons, Kurt and Errol, who lived in the neighborhood and had just come from Austria to this country, and they were not successful at the time, and they didn't have very much money. In fact, they didn't know where the next meal was coming from. And my mother sensed that there might be a need for some financial assistance. And so when Mrs. Wagner, Sonia Wagner, visited my mother one day, my mother put $500 in a cookie jar, and she sent the cookie jar home with Sonia, and she said, "There's some cookies in here that the children might enjoy." And when Sonia got home and she saw $500, she called my mother up, and she was very excited, of course. And she said, "Why did you put it in the cookie jar?" And then my mother said, "Well, if I handed you $500, you might have refused it." And Sonia related the story to me just a few years ago because we visited her in California, and she loved to tell me that. And she said that one day she did return the $500 to my mother in the cookie jar. And it was always a very secure feeling to know that she had $500 in reserve.
That's a lovely story. Which brings me to actually my next question. What values do you feel your parents passed on to you?
Well, from my mother, I think I got the sociability and the need for friends. Also, the family. My mother was very close to her family. I feel very close to mine. My greatest joy is to be surrounded by my children and grandchildren and their spouses, and friends. And we do a lot of that in our lives together. And I think that was the direction that my mother was going in. My father, I guess the interest in science. Oh, my mother also had tremendous love for animals, which I think she passed along to me, which I've also passed
Shared
along.
with me.
Right, to my husband, who's been very kind and understanding about the strays. And then, in turn, we've passed it along to the children. I think they have a feeling for animals. And my father was a scientist, and I think I learned a lot through him. And two of my children are scientists, so I don't know if it, yeah.
Do you know about when they died, and also where are they buried?
My mother died in 1957. She's at Mount Hebron. And my father died in 1965, and he's at Mount Hebron too.
And do you know the nature of their deaths?
My mother, I guess the heart, and the smoking, of course, didn't help, and the weight, and my father had a bleeding ulcer. And
do you have a favorite relative that you'd like to talk about for a minute? Anybody that comes to mind? I know you probably had lots of aunts and uncles.
Yes.
But is there somebody favorite that you'd like to mention?
my Aunt Edie.
Okay, can you relate first of all, how is she related to you, and why is she special?
My Aunt Edie is my mother's sister, baby sister, and she loved us very much. It's her feeling that it was actually my mother that raised her. My mother was her mother. Her mother actually was sick, and my mother, being 5.5 years older than Aunt Edie, did do a lot of the maternal part of her life. I was very sick as an infant, and Aunt Edie was home, and I was in my mother's house at the time, and almost near death, as the story goes. And Aunt Edie was in her house, and she had a strong urge to come to see me. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, she took a subway. She couldn't have been more than 20 or 21. She took a subway to my house. We lived in Queens. Of course, the doors were closed and the lights were out. She climbed in through the window and kissed my feet. And then she also, she fasted every Yom Kippur, had always fasted and has since continued to, but she said the Yom Kippur that I was getting my blood transfusions and so close to death was the one and only time that she ate on Yom Kippur, because she was just so upset with how things were going that was her reaction to it. And she remains my favorite relative. And she's also my tenant in my condo in Florida, and the best tenant I ever had.
Well, I can see why she would be so special to you. Name your siblings now.
My oldest sister is Arlene Eisner. She lives in Florida with her husband Irving and their 2 children, Michael and Larry, and their families. My sister Roberta Schoenbrunn, with her husband Arnold. She has 2 children, Jan and Felice, and they have families. And she lives in Oceanside, and I see her regularly, at least once a week. And my brother, Larry, Happy, Eiglosh. He lives in Miami Beach with his wife Dorothy, and they have 4 children.
They were all born in Brooklyn?
Yes.
It's too much probably to describe each one of them in detail, but how would you describe them as a family, you know, or
We
together?
were a tight, cohesive group, fun-loving family. We still get together to this day, and we do a lot of laughing. We enjoy each other's company.
Were you very similar in personalities?
Well, I think basically we were. I would say yes.
You had a happy childhood.
Yes.
Any stories, anything come to mind, any stories that you would like to share, anecdotes about any of your, you know, your brother or your sisters? I know you mentioned something to me about Roberta, that you shared a...
Roberta and I slept together in the same bed. Yes. We shared a room and a bed, and she moved out when she got married. And that's when we split up. So I have very fond memories of Roberta. She used to draw an imaginary line in the air, and she used to say, "You stay on your side, I'll stay on my side." And then we used to tease each other, "The air is free," and that kind of thing. But basically, we did get along very well together.
That's great. Okay, we're going to move on to talking about where you grew up. I'd like you to just spend a minute and talk about the house that you remember most that you grew up in. First of all, where was it?
It was 649 Marcy Avenue. That's the house that I lived in last before I got married. It was in between Williamsburg and Bed-Stuy.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, right near DeKalb Avenue, DeKalb and Marcy. My father had a drugstore on DeKalb and Marcy on the corner, and we lived a few doors down.
It was
Was
a
the house-
brownstone.
A brownstone house, right.
What
right.
was it like? What, do you have any memories of
We
what it
had
was?
9 rooms. I remember the 9 rooms. The bathroom downstairs often had ducks or other things.
Alligators.
Yeah, right.
Really?
Alligators. We did a lot of moving around. That was our last house, but we did live in many other houses in Brooklyn and Queens before that.
But this was the house that you
Yeah, I remember the most.
growing up in.
Right, right.
What would you say are your fondest memories of living in this house?
I remember family dinners that we had, particularly around the holidays, where we always got together as a family and shared a lot of pleasant
So it was
experiences.
a real meeting place, your house?
Yes, yes. My Aunt Edie came with her family once a week. Also, she was a regular, and other relatives.
And your parents had a lot of friends over?
Yes, yes.
What holidays were most special in your house?
We always had a Thanksgiving dinner, and there were seders, and birthdays were celebrated, and I think almost any excuse for a party.
Was there any special food that you remember at any of these particular holidays that stands out in your mind?
My mother's strong suit was not her cooking, but she did teach me to make blintzes, and I still hold the recipe in my head and still make a mean blintz.
Great.
Cooking is not my strong suit either, but
blintzes
blintzes, I make a mean blintz.
Great, that's great. How would you describe yourself when you were younger, when you were growing up? Were you outgoing, or were you shy? Were you studious? You know, give me an idea of what you were like.
I was on the quiet side, maybe shy. I was studious. School was very important to me. I excelled in school. In elementary school, I was head girl of Optima, which was the Honor Society, and in high school, I was head girl of Arista, which was the Honor Society. And I enjoyed my studies, and I would say never caused any problems, was more of a peacemaker and non-confrontational in nature.
Did you have any nicknames?
Yes.
What were they?
My father called me Quetzala, which is a little kitten, And somehow, some members of the family named me the Rebbitzin. I don't know where that came from, but they used to call me the Rebbitzin. I think Rebbitzins are usually very good. And I was a good girl, right.
How many years did you attend school?
After high school, after Eastern District High School, where I had a wonderful 4 years of high school, 3.5 years actually, got out early. Went to Brooklyn College, also for 3.5 years, got out early there, and got my teaching degree, and then went to Queens College for my MBS and MS, Masters of Science. And then after that, got my administrative certificate at Hofstra, a principal's license.
Wonderful. So going through school, I guess especially in high school, what was your favorite subject and what was your least favorite subject?
My favorite subjects were usually English and science. I enjoyed those subjects. Math, I did fairly well in math. I think I got 100 on the geometry regions.
Sure you did.
Okay. But I came into some difficulty with math later on when my husband-to-be insisted that I take more difficult math courses, although...
It was only a suggestion.
Right, but you know that I did most everything that you suggested. Most everything that you suggested. And so instead of taking the usual survey math course that all my friends were taking as ed majors and getting the assured A in the course, I took college algebra and other more difficult math courses, and Mel helped me, and that's where our relationship developed. And I did not do as well in the math classes. In fact, it's the only D I ever got.
Maybe that's why I wasn't a very good teacher.
Well, I wasn't a very good student.
No.
You mentioned that you did have one teacher who had a big influence on your life. Who was this teacher and what influence?
In high school, Mr. Nathan Mazer, he taught my sisters both before me and then me. I was the third one. He might have even taught my brother, I'm not sure. And his requirement was that we read a novel a week, and from his list of novels. So they were serious books, and I think that at that time I became familiar with the great works of literature, and that's when my thirst for reading began.
That's wonderful. Did you have any jobs when you were younger that you'd like to mention?
Yes, when I was a teenager, I worked probably from the time I got my working papers, maybe 14 or 16, I worked at Woolworths. One job I did everything from selling to, if they needed me in the back during Easter time, I remember shellacking Easter bunnies. And if they broke, of course, I couldn't show that they were broken, and so I ate them. Now you know. And that was through high school. I worked there. And then at college, while I was attending Brooklyn College, I worked as a secretary for New York Life Insurance Company, Martin Laufa. And I went into Manhattan from Brooklyn each day. I went to school from 9 to 12, and then I worked from 1 to 5.
You're a hard-working lady.
Yes, yes.
Did you have any pets that were favorites to you?
Yes, we had many pets all the time.
Which was one that stood out?
Billy, was a mutt, and we had him for many, many years. My mother used to carry him up the steps of the brownstone where we lived on Marcy Avenue because she didn't want him to weaken his heart. And it was an effort for him, so she carried him up the steps. Actually, she died of a heart attack, and Billy, who lived long after her, had to be put to sleep because he was blind. And
did you have any special friends?
Yes, my friend Diane Weil Becker was my closest friend. We grew up together from about 3rd grade on, because around 2nd or 3rd grade we moved to this area, and I went to PS 25, and that's where I found Diane. And we've been close ever since. Never had a fight. We used to stand on the street corners and talk to each other for hours, and then we would split. She lived on Throop Avenue, I lived on Marcy, and we would go home and call each other as soon as we got home and continue the conversations. And just this month, Diane and her husband Mickey and Mel and I went to Europe together, and we spent
wonderful.
2 wonderful weeks
So you've maintained
together.
a
Yes.
relationship. That's
Yes.
wonderful. Who would you say is the most influential person in your life? Somebody that impacted, I'm sure there were many people, but if you had to mention somebody, was there one person who really...
Well, I would say my father and my husband. My father for the educational values that he instilled in me. My mother's value was that you do whatever you want to do and be happy doing it. I think that she wanted us to be happy. She didn't care what level we achieved, but if we were happy doing it and we did it well, that was enough for her. My father, on the other hand, felt that you had to go to the top and beyond your ability, and a college education was a given. You had to do that. And although when you're 14 years old, you sometimes don't see the need for that, my father insisted, and I, being an obedient daughter, I listened, and it's because of him that I did get my college education. And my husband insisted in 1965, I guess it was, when I had 3 young children, I wasn't really ready to take a full-time job. But Mel, a mathematician that he is, had calculated that in another 5 years or so there would be a population decrease, and teachers would not be required in great quantity. And while the going was good, he insisted that I try for a position, which I tried for with Mr. Fessel at the Old Bethpage School. I got my job, and I've been there for 29 years.
Worked out very well, didn't it?
Yes. Right.
Thank
Thank you.
Advice, good advice.
Right.
So after attending with Brooklyn College,
Yes.
right, your desire was to become a teacher, and this has been your life. You love it.
Yes.
Do you remember your first salary that you got as a teacher?
Yes.
And what year approximately?
1954, I started teaching in Baltimore, Maryland. We spent a year there, and my salary was $3,000. In 1965, when I started work at Old Bethpage, I made $5,400 a year.
It's always interesting to see how salaries have changed. Any boyfriends you'd like to describe before you met your husband?
I met Mel when I was 14.
So he was your first boyfriend?
We were romantically involved at 14, but there's no one worth mentioning up until that point.
Describe the circumstances in which you met.
Mel and I met at a custard stand in Coney Island. Diane and I used to go to Coney Island practically every day because we were landlocked in Williamsburg and Bed-Stuy. And I think we got a quarter a day, and we needed probably 10 cents for car fare, and then we had 15 cents for spending money, and we often came to the custard stand where Mel worked, and we bought custard. And
you were going to Washington Baths.
Right.
That's where you did your swimming and ping pong playing.
Right, that's where I learned to play ping pong at Washington Baths. I had a season locker there.
So that's where you met,
yes.
And describe your courtship.
First few years, it was just during the summer. But then, as I mentioned before, we got interested in math tutoring, and I came to Coney Island even in the winter, and Mel tutored me in math. And then he made the big trip to Williamsburg. It wasn't easy. It was 2 buses and trains, and it was over an hour. I was what we call now GU, geographically undesirable, but he made the trip.
It was worth it.
Thank you.
Great. So after how many years did you?
Well, I met him when I was 14. You were 15, and we were married when I was 21.
When and where did you get married?
We got married at Adler's Caterers in Brooklyn on October 10th, 1954.
Can you describe a little bit about the wedding?
It was a lovely wedding.
Big, lavish affair?
Not lavish, but I would say about 100 people. and lovely, just lovely. I have very fond
Any special
memories.
anecdotes at all that you want to say about the wedding? It went smoothly?
Fairly smoothly. I think it was our hope that it would be a small wedding. Actually, my mother wanted it to be larger because she had family that she wanted to invite. And we just had some words about the size of the wedding. And she did invite her family because it was
And I
important to her.
insisted upon getting the whiskey
Right.
for the wedding, and I got it in Washington because I was working in Baltimore,
Right.
and we didn't pay any tax on it, so that was
Right.
a big.
Yes.
So you
big
had
deal.
lots of whiskey.
Yes,
That's
yes.
great.
My father made 3 weddings for his 3 daughters without any help from anyone, but Nell insisted upon buying the liquor.
That was
And yes, and so that,
That was my contribution.
right, right.
Did you go on a honeymoon?
We went to Miami Beach, Florida. We went to the Casablanca Hotel. We were there just a year or 2 ago with my son-in-law's father took us there for dinner. It's still there, and it still holds great
Fond memories for
sentimental, yes. Yeah.
Where was your first home as a married couple?
We moved to Clifton, New Jersey.
Well, we started in Maryland, in
Oh, I forgot.
Baltimore, Maryland.
You started in Baltimore.
Right.
Baltimore.
Oh, how did I forget that? We spent a year in Baltimore, almost a year.
And could you describe your initial years of marriage? For some people, it's an adjustment. Do you have any comment to make
Yes,
about
of course
your
it was an
initial years?
adjustment, but we...
Any challenges or any problems that you encountered?
We both worked, and I became pregnant with my daughter, and she was expected on our anniversary, and she was born 4 days after. So we started with children almost immediately.
So they were basically happy
Yes.
years.
Oh, yes.
Not too many adjustments.
No, I don't think so.
It was happy. We had, when we were in Baltimore, our relatives came to visit us, and we used to come in fairly regularly to see them. So we had a very strong tie to our family. And after Elaine became pregnant and we realized we were going to have a family, we decided to move back to New York.
So you moved back to New York with a child. Or you
No,
were
I moved back
pregnant?
pregnant.
Okay.
Moved back to New Jersey.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you about the children. You had difficult pregnancies, or they were everybody
all normal,
great?
normal healthy pregnancy.
I'd like you to name the children, of course, and who they were named after, and then I would like to ask you to describe each one of them.
Okay.
You can talk about them, share stories with us as they were children, whatever you would like to say. Just talk about the children.
Okay. In retrospect, I never had any major problems with any of my children. My first one was Elise Marsha. She was born October 14th, 1955. And she's named after my father's mother, Esther Malka, my bubby who raised us. And she was a very bright, very independent child. If I did anything for her, she usually undid it and did it herself again. She wanted it her way, and she wanted to do it herself. She started talking abruptly when she was about 1.5 years.
We were driving into Brooklyn, and we were listening to the radio. It was very nice and quiet.
Always quiet, because she never really said
suddenly
much.
she started speaking, and
And she never stopped. She just started, like speech came to her, like Helen Keller. And speech came to her, and she became verbal. And then she just, I think less than 2.
yeah,
Yeah, she was very bright.
she sat in a car seat up front.
Talking.
When we
Yeah.
had the Plymouth.
Yeah.
So as long as we're talking about Elise, now talk about her, describe her. You can talk about her now or growing up. What would you like to say?
There was never anything that Elise couldn't do. She name it and she can do it. She's very talented. She's beautiful, she's bright, she's a pediatrician, she has a very successful practice. People know of her, she has a fine reputation. If you need a good pediatrician in the Five Towns area, usually it's Dr.
We're talking
Jonish.
about Dr. Jonish.
Right, right. She can sew, she's
Excellent mother.
a wonderful mother. She has 5 children.
Caring,
and,
loving.
And I know now you mentioned a story to me that you wanted
Yes,
to...
just recently, Elise and Rebecca, my granddaughter, who is 9, were riding in the car together, and Rebecca noticed an old man approaching the car, a yarmulke and tzitzis, and he knocked on the door. And my daughter rolled down the window, and he said, "Can you give me a ride home?" Now, my daughter is very busy.
Well, it was the Sabbath also, when she had to get home to
I guess she was
Friday
in a bit of a
fishing.
hurry. Right, it was Friday, and they have so much to do in preparation. But they agreed to take the man home. He said he lived just a little down the opposite direction from where they were going. And he was carrying this heavy bag anyway, and she just, she's so kind and compassionate that she agreed to take the man home. And then he said, "If you don't mind, would you please drop me off at the rabbi's house, because the rabbi promised he would give me some kugel." So Elise said, "Where does the rabbi live?" "Oh, just down that block." Well, it was a one-way street. So Elise said, "I'll wait here in the car for you, but please don't be long." And he says, "I'll only be 5 minutes." And he got out, and while he was gone, Elise agreed to, I guess, was it Rebecca who said?
Rebecca suggested that they give the man some money because he seemed to be very poor and in need of help. So Elise put $20 into the bag that the man had, and when he returned, she just said to him, "Be careful, don't throw the bag out." And he said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, there's a little something we put in there." And he was extremely grateful and taken back by it. And that's just an example of how generous she is. And it's an attribute that she's passing along to her children also.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Okay, and would you like to go on now to...
Jeffrey is my next son, Jeffrey Wayne Lynn. Jeffrey was named after my mother. I was pregnant with Jeffrey when my mother died. And Wayne is Mel's grandfather.
Right, William.
William.
And when was he born?
He was born March 15th, 1958. Wonderful child, sweetheart, never had a problem with him. He went to Oneonta. Did I mention that Elise went to Binghamton, and then she went to Hershey Medical School, where she became a doctor. Jeffrey went to Oneonta, studied accounting, but he's such a people person that after a few years of accounting, he realized that that was not for him, and he has since opened a Chicken Delicious store, which is his company, in Valley Stream, which is very successful. In fact, a man came into the store one day and asked Jeffrey if he would donate some chicken for some orphans that he was taking on a boat ride fishing. And Jeffrey said, "Yeah, sure, what would you like?" And the man said, "Just, a couple of pieces of chicken," and so on. And Jeffrey said, "No problem," and packed it up for the man. It seems as though the man had gone, previous to Jeffrey's store, had gone to several of the larger chains. And at each store, the man was told that they were not in a position to donate any chicken for orphans. One said, "I'll have to check with my manager." The other one said, "It's not our policy to do that." And of course, when he came to Jeff, Jeff gave. The man had, after that, wrote a letter to the chain, to the major chain, telling them how disappointed he was by being thwarted, and how kind and generous Jeff Lynn was at Chicken Delicious. And he said, he sent a copy of that letter to my son and said that he was posting that letter at his fishing club where he docks the boat. And he's also very giving, very kind, loves children. You always see, he's always playing with children. He has 3 wonderful children of his own. And
That's wonderful.
And to continue, Jeffrey not only has a chicken store, but he's also a very successful businessman, and he's into many ventures, and people flock to him because he is such a people person, and he's a very generous, giving person, and he's also ambitious, and he's doing very well.
That's wonderful.
and successful, very
Great.
successful.
Great. Okay.
And my baby is Howard Scott Lynn.
Howard's
And,
named after my grandfather, Hersch, and Hersch's wife, Silke. So his name is Howard Scott.
When was he born?
He was born October 18th, 1960. Was very successful at Bethpage High School. I think maybe the number 3 student, or close to the at least the top 5%
Definitely
of the school, and was accepted upon graduation into the 6-year med program at Union College and went to Albany.
No, we should also mention that he was a superb athlete in high school, and
yes. Number 1 tennis player, captain of the tennis team.
as was Jeff, we should mention. Jeffrey also was an excellent athlete. They were both captains of the tennis team, and in addition, Howard was the number 1 male fencer in Nassau County and went into the championships. He also was a star baseball player and went on to the All-Star games in Little League.
And Jeffrey too.
Jeffrey
was,
too, right.
Outstanding.
Very
Yes.
athletic.
Yes.
That's wonderful. And he is now a successful urologist.
He's a urologist in Smithtown.
And I think you have a little bit of a letter.
a little
you just
bit.
want to read just a drop to show
Yes.
that.
While he was learning to be a doctor, he was at Albany Medical School, and I think at that time he was training and came across this woman, Teresa Battalla, who was a patient of his. And in 1982, she wrote, "Dear Howie, I would like to thank you for being so kind to me. Your visits every day brighten my day. You were the first one there every morning with your big smile to see how I felt." And then she goes on to say, "Howie, you're going to be a fine doctor and a very important one too. And I want you to, well, she says, this is meant as a friend and I'm going to miss you." So, yeah, people have commented about Howard's wonderful bedside manner, and
He's a very compassionate doctor, and especially his bedside manner.
So you have 3 wonderful children
Yes.
that you can feel
Right.
very proud of.
and
I don't think we could say enough about how wonderful Howard was during my mother's illness, and how he took charge and was right on top of everything.
I think you mentioned how wonderful he is in a crisis.
Yes.
And you mentioned how your mother
Yes.
was wonderful in a
Right.
crisis. So
Right. The sight of blood, and well, for Elise too. Someone came to the door one day with a splinter, a very, very deep splinter. Elise wasn't home, we were babysitting. But I said to her later, suppose we were home, what would you have done? That child was rushed to the hospital and treated there surgically. She said, I would have taken my tweezers, and you wonder, how she could handle that. Yeah. Shall I mention now that each of my children is married to 3 wonderful spouses. Elise is married to George Jonish, and
They have 5 children.
they have 5 children. Jeff is married to Joanne, and they have 3 children. And Howard is married to Nora, and they have 1.
that's lovely.
So we have 9 grandchildren.
9 grandchildren.
Yes.
That's
They
wonderful.
bring us great pleasure.
And actually,
My name is Melvin Lynn, and I was born January 10th, 1933 in Brooklyn.
and who were you named after?
I was named after my mother's grandfather, whose name was Meisch, and his last name was Schaffer. So I was named after Meisch Schaffer. Yes, my original name was Lynchitz, and my father changed the name legally when I was approximately 8 years old, and I've been known as Melvin Lynn since then.
Do you know who your first family members were that arrived in this country?
Yes, the first one to come to this country was my grandfather, Harry Schaefer, who came from Poland in approximately the 1900s, and he was later followed by his wife, Silke, and On my father's side, the earliest people that I know were my father's father, William, and his wife, Annie. My grandfather and grandmother both came from Zabłotów in Poland. That's my mother's mother and father. And my father's mother and father came from a town in Poland called Pernopol. And my father's mother came from a town called Lwów in Poland.
And I know you mentioned to me there was a story about your grandpa Harry with Zabłotów.
Yes.
Do you want to tell that story?
Yes, my grandfather actually did not come from Zabłotów, but he came from a small town close by called Pachezva. And what had happened is he became an orphan before his father was born, and he was actually named after his father. And when his mother remarried, he did not have a very happy home life, so he moved from Pachezva to Zabłotów, where his cousins lived, and that's where he eventually married his cousin, Silke. So it was quite common at the time for them to marry first cousins, and he did, as well did his brother-in-law Newson, who he was very close with, and his brother-in-law Benny. So it was quite common.
Were there any anecdotes told to you about what their life was like in the old country before coming to America? Did you hear any stories?
Well, my grandfather told me a little bit about his life there.
Which grandpa?
This was my grandfather, Hirsch, who we called Zaid. He was in the Polish Marines at the time under the command of Franz Joseph. That was the Austrian emperor. And he told me that the way he learned how to swim was he had a full pack on his back, and they marched him off a pier, and it was either sink or swim, so he learned how to swim very quickly with a full pack. And he was also had an infirmary as a result of being in the army for the emperor, and he did receive a small compensation even while he was in the United States for a short period of time.
Interesting story. Because we're speaking about your grandparents, I know you mentioned their names, but just repeat them again, both sets of grandparents.
Okay, on my mother's side, my grandfather's name was Hirsch Harry Schaefer. His wife was named Silke Schaffer, but before she was married, her name was Schnabel. So her maiden name was Schnabel. My grandparents on my father's side, my father's father was called William, and he came from Parnopol. My grandmother, her name was Annie Annie Mager, M-A-G-E-R, and her father was Kalman Laser, and her mother was Peril Itta, and her maiden name was Seaman, which by some quirk turns out to be related to my daughter-in-law Joanne. So we have some common ancestors, and Jeffrey, my son, who's married to Joanne, might be cousins, distant cousins to his wife.
That's a very interesting story. Do you have any idea when these people were born, roundabout?
I believe my grandfather on my mother's side was born approximately 1872, and Silke was a little younger, maybe 10 years younger, so she may have been in the 1880s. I know little about my grandparents on my father's side, although I did know my grandma Annie.
Oh, could you describe them, starting with Harry?
My
What would you like to say about him? Do you have any stories that you'd like to talk about?
Yes, my grandfather, that we called Zaid, was a very devoted grandfather, and almost all of our my life, I lived with him before I got married. My grandmother, his wife, unfortunately died at an early age when I was about 7 or less, maybe six or seven. And my grandfather never remarried, but moved in with my mother and father and was very close and completely devoted to his family and especially his grandchildren, myself and my brother Sheldon.
I think you mentioned to me he worked for a gas company.
Right. When my grandfather first came to this country, he landed in the United States, and he stayed for a short time with his cousin, a fellow by the name of Hash Schlabe, and his name was Schaefer also. And this man was a butcher, and my grandfather apprenticed as a butcher. And he soon left that job and took a job in the gas company working for Con Edison, and then that was followed by his final job, which was a presser, and he was a member of the ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, of which he was very proud, and he was a charter member in that union.
And Silka?
Silka was a homemaker. She was his wife, and she was a very devoted grandmother and was also very devoted to her family that she left in Poland. And she and my grandfather were instrumental in saving money and bringing over relatives before the Holocaust happened.
Really?
So they were instrumental in saving lives.
Many lives.
Yes.
Interesting. Did she work in a bakery, or was she at a bakery?
No.
Story about a bakery.
Well, when I was very young, and it was right after the Depression, my parents and I and my brother lived with my grandparents in their apartment. And my grandmother, Silka, would walk to her brother's bakery, which was a good distance away, almost a half a mile, every day, and she would take me with her, and we would visit the bakery, and we would get the rolls or the bread for the day, and it was a very happy time being with her.
That's lovely. Okay, any memories of the other side? Anything you want to say?
Well, unfortunately, my father's father died at an early age, and I didn't really know him very well. My grandmother, Annie, who's my father's mother, was my grandmother on the scene and for many years, and she came to visit us when we got married, and she saw our children growing up also.
And where are they buried? Where are the grandparents buried?
All of the grandparents are buried at Mount Hebron Cemetery in Queens, right.
Okay, I'd like to go on to your parents now. Give me their complete names.
Okay, my father's name was Joseph Lynchitz, who later changed his name to Joseph Lynn, and he was born in the United States about 1903. He had 2 sisters, Bertha and Clara. My mother, her name was Clara Schaefer, and she was born in Poland and came to this country when she was approximately 3 years old, or maybe a little older. I'm not sure the exact time that she came. And she did not have any brothers or sisters, and she came here, like I said, at an early age.
Okay, I'd like you to describe them physically and their personalities as you remember them.
My father was a ambitious man. He could have achieved great heights. Unfortunately, he had to leave his schoolwork at approximately the age of 13 to help his father out in times of depression, and times were not easy for them. So he became a businessman at an early age to take care of his mother and sisters. My mother was always a sheltered child by my doting grandfather and grandmother, and I think she had a very happy life.
I know you mentioned to me earlier that your father was a gambler.
Right.
Could you comment on that?
My father was always in the butter and eggs business, and part of that business was to candle eggs, which was to examine the eggs for any blood spots. And I guess before they had electricity, they used a candle, so the common term for that work was a candler. And that was what he did for his livelihood, besides trying to make a living by being in a butter and egg store and working also for Swift and Company.
Interesting. Any stories that you have to share about your parents, how they met, or is there anything that comes to mind, any anecdotes you'd like to share?
Well, my father met my mother in Coney Island, just as I met my wife in Coney Island. My father was delivering butter and eggs to the grocery stores, and my mother was living on 25th Street in Coney Island. And in the apartment house that she lived there was a grocery store. And my father was making a delivery there, and he saw this very attractive young girl, and he asked to be introduced to her. And that was the beginning of their romance, and they did get married.
What values do you feel your parents passed on to you?
I think my father was very ambitious. He had a deep thirst for knowledge, and while he was not well educated, he used to tinker with things. He would try to fix radios before he knew what he was doing. He would take the tubes out and play with them and put them back, and always got it to work. And he was quite unique in his mechanical abilities. My mother was always a devoted mother, and she took care of the home and made it a very pleasant home to grow up in.
Okay. Now, where are they buried?
Both my parents are buried near my grandfather and grandmother at Mount Hebron Cemetery.
And do you know the nature of the reasons for their death?
My father died, I would say, of heart failure. He was heavy and never really took care of his physical condition. They didn't know as much about physical exercise and activities, and
He had diabetes too.
he had diabetes. And my mother, unfortunately, was a very heavy smoker and died of cancer. I would say that probably my grandfather was the...
Which grandfather?
This is my grandfather, Hersh,
Okay,
who...
why?
Well, he was a very devoted grandfather, and like I said before, he never remarried, and he lived with us. He was a doting grandfather, always worried about us, and took care of my brother and myself, and he was a constant companion.
So you were very close.
Yes, we were very
I
close.
just want to go backtrack a minute to your parents. We talked a little bit earlier, and I think you mentioned that Joseph was interested in the stock market.
Yes, yes. My father, besides being in the butter and eggs business, made a living by following the stock market. And strangely enough, both my youngest brother, Sidney, and my son, Jeffrey, are deeply involved in that aspect, and I think it might be somehow hereditary. If there was such a trait, it's directly traceable to my father.
Interesting. And going back to your mother a minute, I think you had a memory of something with wrapping paper.
Right.
You talked about that, and it was a...
Right. My grandfather, when he was working as a presser, used to bring home large sheets of wrapping paper. And I remember as a boy of 4, my grandfather would cover the dining room table with these big sheets of paper, and we would do arithmetic, my brother and myself, arithmetic and spelling, and that was our way of learning. So we got an early education at home on the basics of arithmetic and spelling.
So your mother was very involved in your education.
Right.
She was
My-
so to it that you did your homework and
Yep, she was right on top of
she
it.
was right on top.
Both my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother actually took me to school at the age of 4, and she enrolled me in kindergarten. I don't remember if it was either my mother or my grandmother, but I ended up taking kindergarten twice because they thought I should get a leg up on education.
Can you name your siblings?
I have two brothers, Sheldon and Sydney. Sheldon is 2 years younger than me, and Sydney is 14 years younger than me.
Would you describe them?
Well, I grew up with, I should say, Sheldon grew up with me because I came first, and we were very close. We were 2 years apart, and it was always my responsibility to know where he was at all times. And my mother would ask me to find him if he was out playing in the street, and I would remember going out and looking for him. And we called him not Sheldon, but actually Shaik, which is a nickname for his Hebrew name, which was Shia. So I would go through the streets calling for Shaik, and everyone knew him as Shaik. That's how he grew up. And Sydney, I didn't know as well because he was 14 years my junior, but I do remember taking care of him as a baby and knowing when my mother was pregnant with him that he was due.
So you must have had some wonderful stories. Were you alike, you and your brothers, or in what ways were you alike? In what ways were you different?
Well, I think physically we're very much the same. We're all a little bit on the heavy side, but we all, I think, got the same type of training from our parents, that we were ambitious, we were interested in education and improving ourselves, and we worked hard going to school. So that was...
Are there any anecdotes, any stories you want to share about your brothers that come to mind?
About my brothers?
Anything? I know you mentioned you were always worried about Sheldon.
I was always worried where he was, and that was my job to find him.
So you had good relationships with both?
Yes, yes.
Now describe where you grew up. The house that you remember most, where you spent most of your childhood years, where was it, first of all?
It was in Coney Island. We lived at 2935 West 30th Street. It was a two-family house, and it was my father's house, and my grandfather lived there with us. So for the most part, it was my brother, my younger brother, Sheldon, my mother, my father and grandfather, and we lived close to the beach. A very enjoyable community to grow up in. And
what were your best memories there?
Going to the beach and swimming, and having a wonderful summer, and the schools were good, and enjoying going to school, and just having a good life.
Social club? Was
Well,
that a big part of your growing up?
When I got to be about 14 or 15, I joined a social club. It was actually a gathering of all my friends, and we formed a club, and we used to meet in a cellar, and it was called really a cellar club, but we called it an athletic club. And it was a place where we would congregate and have parties, and we would bring girls to the parties, and it was just a wonderful way of socializing.
Can you describe to me how holidays were celebrated at your home? First of all, what holidays were special? What comes to mind?
Well, as a young boy, still living with my grandparents, I remember the Passover and the preparation for the Passover.
What was it like?
Well, it was a lot of work. I remember that there was dishes down in the basement, and we lived 4 flights above the basement. And I remember we had to move the dishes from the basement to the 4th floor, and the dishes from the 4th floor down to the basement in these big barrels. And I remember my grandmother making kashrus of the dishes that were not moved, which meant that you took an iron and heated it up till it was red hot, and let hot water run over the fire, this hot iron, and that's how she koshered it. And I also remember that my grandfather took a feather and went looking in all the crevices to clean out the remaining chametz that was left. That's the bread, and it was just a very enjoyable time.
Do you remember any special foods that were prepared on holidays? Anything comes to mind?
I remember my grandmother, that's my mother's mother, being a wonderful cook and homemaker. She baked her own challah, and I remember on Fridays she would be making the challah, and she would cover it with egg, and would get a glisten on it. And she made some wonderful dishes, especially for me and my brother.
What dishes? Do you remember any?
Well, we always got the eggs from the chicken, and they were rendered in chicken fat. And it was always chicken fat on bread that we used to eat with salt. And she used to make a potato nick, and it was a potato batter that was baked with a hard crust and onions on the bottom of it. And I'm still trying to find someone who'll make it for me. I remember Friday nights, the preparation for the Sabbath, and it was always a lovely time in our home, especially when my grandmother was alive.
Who lit the candles?
My grandmother did, and so did my mother. And that was a unique time because, like I said before, my mother was a heavy smoker. She never smoked on a Sabbath. And we tried to prevail upon her to stop smoking, and we knew she could do it if she could stop for the Sabbath. Never worked.
Describe yourself when you were younger, when you were in your younger years, as you were growing up. What were you like? Any tales to demonstrate the way you were?
I think I grew up to be a happy person. Living in a community was just wonderful. It was a safe community, and I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed playing ball in the park. I loved going to the beach. It was a wonderful place to socialize. We met a lot of girls, and we had a lot of fun.
So sports played a big part in your life.
Right.
What were some of the earliest sports that you played?
We played punch ball and stick ball. These are games that you learn to play in the city because you don't have many big fields. But I did play football also, and I enjoyed track, especially when I got to college. I enjoyed that the most.
Did you have any nicknames? Anybody call you anything?
Well, I grew up being called Maish because my grandmother called me that. I was named after her father.
Was your bar mitzvah special to you? Do you remember it, and do you remember the impact? What do you remember about it?
Well, I remember my mother made some big party in her house. In addition to the catered affair that we had, my mother had actually made two parties for me. One party was in the house, and I remember that she needed a very long table for the party where she was having the invited guests that came to the synagogue. And it was very difficult to get this table to the house. And she found a place, another shul close by, about 2 blocks from where we lived, that had a long table. And it was my job to get the table. And the table was very large. And fortunately, it snowed. And I was able to bring the table home, sliding it on the snow. And I've told that story to my grandchildren. So they're going to remember it. We had a big party for my bar mitzvah. It was held at a catering hall called the Shadow Door, which is also the place where my mother and father got married.
How interesting.
Yes.
Do you remember doing your Haftorah?
I remember studying for it at the 23rd Street shul, and it took approximately 6 to 7 months to study for it. And I had to study after hours. We used to study, go to school, go to Hebrew school, and then after Hebrew school we used to study the Haftorah. And my teacher was Mr. Resnick.
You must have been very satisfied with yourself when you completed your Haftorah.
It was.
Remember how you felt?
It was like a big ordeal. But my cousins and friends, we did continue to go to shul even after the bar mitzvah. We had gone to junior congregation from about the age of 9 years old, and we continued on even much beyond our bar mitzvah to maybe about 14 or 15.
As far as secular school goes, how many years did you attend school? Attended high school.
I went to high school, and I completed high school in 3 years.
What was the name of your high school?
I went to Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, and I graduated in 1950, January 1950, and went to City College on 137th Street and Convent Avenue, and graduated in 1954 with an electrical engineering degree.
What were your favorite subjects and your least favorite subjects?
Well, I enjoyed science and physics, math. The subjects I enjoyed, I did well in, and the subjects I did not enjoy, I did not do too well in.
How about foreign languages?
That was one of the bad ones. I did not take well to French.
You did not take well to French.
Did you mention your master's?
Oh, I forgot to mention my master's.
You went on after college for a master's degree. Where did you go for that?
I got a master's degree from City College in same 137th Street and Convent Avenue, and an MBA from Adelphi University in Business Administration.
And the master's was also in...
Master's in Electrical Engineering, and then a master's in Business Administration.
Okay.
Well, about the age of 12, I started out working at Coney Island and in a concession, and this was on 29th Street, and I sold buttermilk and orange juice and milk. And my cousin, who was about a year older than me, got a job in a custard stand. So the following year, I got a job in a custard stand also. And that was called Willie's Custard Stand. It was on Stillwell Avenue. And I eventually met my wife there. So it was a very happy time.
I'm going to ask you if you had a favorite toy, because we talked about this earlier, and I think it's interesting in terms of what you did later on. What was this favorite toy?
The favorite toy that I had was an Erector set, and my father bought it for me. I remember we spent hours working at it and building all kinds of toys and projects. So that was a very...
Always very mechanical.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, my father was always interested in tinkering, and I guess I developed that from him.
Any special friends that you had growing up?
I primarily stayed with my cousin Marvin, Joe Green, and Ronnie Fetcher. These were the fellows that I worked with in the summertime and belonged to the club and grew up with.
Any special stories at all? Did you take a trip with them?
Yes. When we were about 18 years old, we took a trip to Washington, D.C. to visit Joe's cousins. And we started out with my cousin's car. I think Joe and Marvin both owned the car. And it was a real wreck. And we decided that if the car ever stopped running, we would just throw it in the river and walk away.
Did you make it to Washington and back?
We made it to Washington and back, so it held up.
It held up. So what would you say are some of your happiest memories growing up?
Happiest memories, I would say, would be my family life, growing up with my grandfather and guidance that he gave us, and my father and mother, and being with my brothers. I think that was the happiest.
And there was one sad moment in your life?
Early, when I was approximately 7 or 8, my grandmother died, and I felt that loss.
You also felt very sad, you mentioned to me earlier, about Pearl Harbor. That seemed
Right.
to have an impact.
I remember that was a sad day. I was walking with my father on Mermaid Avenue in Coney Island, and I know the street was ablaze with commotion on December 7th, and I asked my father what had happened, and he told me that the United States was attacked, and it was not a happy day.
I'm sure you've had several influential people in your life. Would you like to name some of them now and describe how they impacted upon your life?
Well, my grandfather was very close to myself and my brother. He was always a doting companion, and he gave up and sacrificed a great deal for us because he never married after my grandmother died and came to live with us.
Anybody else that you feel was influential?
I would say my uncle and my cousins,
Your uncle?
my Uncle Newson, who was my grandfather's brother-in-law.
You felt very close.
Yes.
They continued to visit. Even after we got married, they came to visit the children. Uncle Newson and Tante Becky would come to visit
Right.
Really?
here for many years. It gave them a place to visit in his retirement. And they would bring lifesavers for the children.
I hope the children remember that.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to where we're talking about people being influential in your life. Were there other people that you would like to talk about who impacted on your life?
I would say most significantly would be my wife, who's been a constant friend and lover and wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
How would you describe yourself when you were growing up? What were you like?
I think I was happy and aggressive and looking to improve myself and try to conquer the world. And we did it, I say we because it was my friends and myself, we did it together by going to school and studying hard and working hard.
You chose electrical engineering. Why?
I think probably because of the influence of my father getting me interested in radio, and I started to read and I studied physics, and I was also interested in atomic physics at an early age, and it's kind of led to electrical engineering, and it's provided an interesting field for me.
And what were your likes and dislikes about your profession?
Well, it was a rewarding profession. It was challenging and always on the edge of a new technology and something new to learn. And the other side was that it was always a secure profession, and it afforded me the ability to raise my family in a nice manner.
Describe some of your first jobs, and if you can remember your salary, it's always interesting again to comment on some of your first salary.
My first job out of college was in Towson, Maryland, working for Bendix Radio, and I think my first salary was about $5,000 a year. Is that right?
$100 a week.
$100 a week.
Right.
That was 1954, and after that first year out of school, we moved back to New York, and I went to work for Bendix in Teterboro, New Jersey. And that's where Elaine and I made our home in New Jersey, in Clifton, on Martha Avenue. And that's where Jeffrey was born. Elise was born in Brooklyn, but Jeffrey was born in New Jersey. And after that, we moved to Long Island, and we moved to this home, 62 Eileen Avenue, and that's where Howard was born.
And how about your first girlfriend?
My first girlfriend, well, it was such a long time ago, I can only remember one, and that's Elaine.
That's wonderful. It's always interesting to ask each person how they met the other to see if it's exactly the same story. How did you meet?
I was working in the custard stand, and this beautiful girl came almost daily, and she bought an ice cream, and that's how we began.
And any stories about your courtship, any anecdotes?
Well, I wanted to impress her, and I thought I would do so by showing her how smart I was. So I wanted her to take math, and that worked out pretty well for me, but I don't think it did too well for Elaine.
What are your memories of the wedding?
Our wedding was very nice. It was at Adler's, and we had, I thought, a large affair. Elaine thinks it was small, but I thought it was pretty large. And we had all our relatives, and it was a joyous time. And we just had a marvelous time, as I remember.
And your initial years of marriage, how would you describe them?
I thought they were very good. We became very good friends quickly, and I think we had a secure life, and we had many common interests. We knew exactly what we wanted out of life. We wanted to
What were
build.
your common interests at that time, in the early years of marriage? What did you like to do together?
We would visit our family together. We would swim together. We would partake in sports together. And we took vacations, and we just had a wonderful life.
I see that both of you enjoyed table tennis. Is that something you did in earlier years too?
Well,
Ping pong?
yes, Elaine taught me how to play ping pong. I knew a little bit, but she put the edge on it.
He's still trying to beat me.
And we've since taken up tennis, and we enjoyed bike riding and walking
And bridge.
and
So you
bridge.
did all these things in your early years of
No,
marriage?
No, we started playing tennis in our 30s,
Right.
and we started playing bridge after Howard was born.
But in
Or
your
after Howard.
earlier years of marriage, the things that you liked to do together,
I think we like to go away on vacations to the mountains. We went away with Elaine's brothers and sisters, and my brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws, and we just had wonderful times over there.
so those were happy years.
Yes, yes.
Right. Not too many hardships or challenges that you felt you had to meet during those first years.
I thought we had a pretty good, secure life. We always made a good living, and it was more than adequate for our needs, and we put away for our children's education. That's what we were saving for.
Were you in the military?
No, I never was in the military. I was 4F because of a heart murmur. But I did work for the military. I worked in defense electronics and developed many instruments that were used by the military.
Used in the military, yes. And I think you have a story to tell about the lunar module, which I'd like you to relate.
Right. During my work at Grumman, I worked on the lunar module, which was the first manned device to go to the moon. And because I was working on it, we signed a plaque, and that plaque was taken to the moon and brought back, and my name was on the plaque. So there's some recognition of having worked on that program.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What would you like to say about your children?
Well, I think they're all very similar. They have some characteristics which are seems to run through their life. They're ambitious, they're generous, and they're compassionate. All three of them. They all exhibit those characteristics, and I love them very much.
I'd like to ask both of you now together, how have the children influenced your life? What would you like to say?
Well, I
In
think
what way have they enhanced your life?
I think by giving us grandchildren that we're
Grandchildren
so
particularly,
involved
yeah.
with, and so much joy. I think that's probably the most important feature.
We take an active interest in our grandchildren, and every opportunity we have, we visit with them, we babysit when the kids go on vacation. But even before that, with the children, you were very involved in their in classwork,
Education.
physics particularly, and math. I was more involved in their English projects or writing, or typing the papers, and their educational years, I think, we work very hard with them through their school.
Very involved with them growing up. Did you participate in the sports with them?
No, we had the
and,
Little League.
Yeah, I
through
think
we went to the kids' tennis matches and watched them play. We went to the fencing.
Little League matches.
Right.
And we visited them when they were up at school. We made many journeys to Oneonta, Binghamton, and Schenectady, where Union is located. So we were very involved with our children, and it was a very enjoyable time.
What values do you feel that you instilled in them? What did you give them?
I think that once they start a program, they don't walk away from it. They and not quitters, and usually they see it through to a very high level, and many times they exceed our expectations.
Did you have a special 60th birthday party?
I recently had a surprised 60th birthday party. I think I've had 2 parties. One was in Florida, which caught me by surprise, and the second one was here that my children hosted, which caught me by surprise. And 2 wonderful times. I met with all my family, and it was a joyous period. I think the major success that we both enjoyed was our careers, but more importantly, I think family life and bringing up our children. I think that's the most important thing that we've...
Your successes.
Yes.
What advice would you like to give to your children, your grandchildren, offspring? What would you like to say?
I thought about that, and I jotted down this, which I really think reflects my my opinions and attitudes, that time is a rationed, irretrievable treasure. Use it wisely with those you love. And I try to follow that principle by spending time with my children and grandchildren.
If you had to do it all over again, would you do anything different?
I think I'd get married earlier
Earlier than 21?
to the same girl.
That's wonderful. Okay. I
Sweet.
think we have...
I was just going to ask you to do that.